Welcome to another episode of Football in Focus. I'm Ryan Downey, joined as always by Kevin O'Connell. Kevin can be followed at KevOC7. We haven't mentioned that on any of our previous broadcasts, but he's developing quite the following with his work with CBS Sports, and wanted to give him that little throw out. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Ryan. How are you doing?
I'm good. I had a really good weekend. We were talking a little off air, but I was really proud of how my golf game was yesterday morning, having not played in a couple of months. So everything's good with the world.
It's the benefit of living in Southern California. I got on the plane in New York yesterday in the morning. It was about 23, 24 degrees. Got off the plane in San Diego yesterday in the mid-70s, it felt like. So I think we've made good career decisions by trying to live in Southern California. But my golf game is probably not quite just the pull the clubs out of the storage and hit the course level that you are, but I'm trying to catch you.
Well, we've got probably 9 months for the next member guest, so you better get that game rounded into shape. I won't tolerate not making the playoffs again this year, so that's going to be on you, bud.
I haven't felt pressure like I did that Sunday morning or Saturday, whatever it was, Saturday morning like that in years. So I've got to figure out a way to execute when all things are on the line.
Good stuff. Well, you mentioned the Army game. I know you've covered them for most of their home broadcasts throughout the year for CBS Sports. What's it been like following basically the same team, whether it's every week or every other week, doing those Army games? I would imagine that's pretty unique, not covering necessarily a different team each week, but kind of focusing on them once every couple of weeks.
Yeah, we did Armies. We did, I believe, 4 games at West Point, and then we did the one, technically an Army home game at Yankee Stadium. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. You get to know the players. They get to know you. There's a level of trust there. But at the end of the day, we're still working for CBS Sports Network, and it's not technically supposed to be an Army broadcast, but we do our best to obviously, skirt that line and make sure that we're showing all the wonderful pageantry there and the pictures of West Point and the great history up there and everything that has to do with that team and the coaching staff. And I think we do a pretty good job of that. But, yeah, it's been really fun. And we're going to finish up this week down in Louisiana for basically what's turned into a semifinal game in Conference USA. But the Army package was fun. Got a chance to meet some of the guys that are going to be leading not only our Army but society at some point. I can't tell you the numbers of guys that get down there in West Point, fulfill their obligations, and end up being CEOs, or they start their own companies, or they work as consultants, and they end up being the people that shape our society. So getting to know those guys and getting to know kind of what makes them tick, I can rest assured and rest easy knowing we're going to be in good hands.
Yeah, you guys did a great job with the broadcast, and I thought it was an interesting game. I mean, whether it was the fake punt in the first half where the punter threw a ball that probably went as high as it went long, that Fordham actually converted for a touchdown kind of late in the first half. It was sort of a wild game in and of itself. But one of the things you guys highlighted in the broadcast that I thought was particularly cool was that this was right around the time that these young men found out sort of where they were going to be stationed. And sort of that almost was, for them, even this was their last home game, that was almost a more important part of this particular week or weekend or whatever it happened to be, which I thought was refreshing. For a lot of guys, it's, hey, we're on to the NFL, or we're on to this, we're on to that. These guys are on to kind of their postings.
Field artillery, infantry, intelligence gathering. I mean, they call it branch night. It happened on Thursday night, and play-by-play guy Ben Holden and I were actually at practice on Thursday afternoon, braving the cold. I think it was like 18 degrees, but some of our, not favorites, but some of the veteran guys on the team, firsties as they call them, seniors there at West Point, they couldn't get off the practice field fast enough and get in and change and get into their proper attire to go to branch night and find out where they're going to go. And the way it works is they basically have to, a lot of things go into it. Obviously, their major, their class rank, all the classes that they took while they were at West Point. But then it has to do with, where certain powers that be think that you belong and where you'll best suit and best help the Army as a second lieutenant, because that's what these guys are when they graduate from West Point. So it kind of puts it in perspective a little bit. And I know you know that I'm a little bit, I get caught up in the football sometimes, and I've done my very best to not only learn about that triple option offense, but figure out ways to talk about it and highlight it and show the different aspects of it. But sometimes I get caught up in the football side of things and the X's and O's, and you forget, what these guys are going to be doing, and they're going to be leading troops at some point. They're going to be off to military bases next year throughout our country, and then on to whatever conflict we need as citizens for them to go protect our freedom. So you get caught up in it sometimes, but it's really cool to be a part of it, and I'm very thankful for CBS for allowing me to do that.
No, it was certainly special, and you guys did, I think, a phenomenal job of sort of helping to craft that for the viewing public, because we turned in to see a football game, but there is so much more at play, and I think you guys did a great job, and that was fun to see that aspect of it highlighted. Your alma mater, I was at the San Diego State game on Friday night, and I think it was the first complete game that they had played. We obviously saw them play a great first half against Boise State the week before, only to sort of let that momentum go in the second half. They've had a lot of games where they've played a great second half and not a great first half. This seemed to me to be the most complete full game that they had played as a team. It helps that Ezeal Ruffin was back, and he had a couple of phenomenal catches that we probably would have called outstanding before we saw Odell Beckham's catch yesterday.
Yeah.
But it's nice to see sort of those guys play a game start to finish.
Well, I think it was an important game for them, too, when you think about the landscape of their season, getting that sixth win to be bowl eligible. They'll play San Jose State this weekend at home on Senior Day, special day for a class that, when you think about it, they arrived on campus right after a lot of these guys were right after Brady Hoke's first year, and then they were either redshirted or they came in the following year and played right away, but they were guys that have never not finished a season with a bowl game. And when you think about 3 bowl games in the previous, I think, 31 years at San Diego State, these guys have been to 4 straight, and now they should be going to their 5th straight. In an era when everybody's downplaying the Idaho Potato Bowl or the Bell Helicopters Bowl or the Poinsettia Bowl, just remember that bowl games are the rewards of success and hard work that these guys put in and year out. And I think sometimes in fantasy football worlds and NFL worlds, we all think about Super Bowls, and if you're not the team that won the championship, then you had a miserable year. College football is just not like that. No matter what they want to do with a playoff or what they want to do with that national championship, there's a lot of teams around the country that deserve to be recognized for success, and San Diego State's one of them. One of many in the Mountain West that have had really solid years. But that Air Force team, 2-10 a year ago, they're now, or they came into that game 9-2 or 8-2, I believe. They're now not 8-3. Just remarkable that a service academy like that can be that productive. But San Diego State, you're right. You're spot on, Ryan. They played their best game all around of the whole entire season. 4 quarters of good football. Air Force is a good team. They kind of battled back there early in the game once San Diego State was able to get out in front. But no flinch in the Aztecs, and they finish it off, and they do it behind a lot of their great seniors, like a guy like Ezeal Ruffin. And obviously, like we've seen him do time and time again, one of the most exciting young running backs in the country, DJ Pumphrey.
Well, and I've heard from some scouts this morning sort of revisiting their grade on him from the collarbone injury earlier in the year that see him as that sort of 3rd, 4th, 5th round kind of guy that can be a real productive number 2 or number 3 in the NFL, and I think that's accurate. He probably is in the East-West Shrine game this year if he doesn't get a late call-up to the Senior Bowl. I know he's on Phil Savage's sort of radar screen for that. Terry Poole's got an NFL future. He's a guy that's been real productive for them. Don't know whether he stays on the left side, he goes to the right side, he gets kicked in and play guard. He's going to be in the Shrine game, possibly a Senior Bowl guy. But this is a San Diego State team that over the last dozen or so years has produced more, like yourself, produced more NFL talent than you would have probably thought. I mean, they're in probably the top 20 or 25 teams in college football as far as producing NFL talent, and I think sometimes that's lost because they play in the Mountain West. But the last half a dozen years or so, they have been real successful, and it's good to see them finally kind of put things together with what I know their goals were at the beginning of the year. Yeah,
and Ezeal and Terry, well, the best thing about those guys is the last thing they're going to talk to you about is the East-West Shrine game or their NFL future. The first thing they talk about is their relationships with their coaches and their teammates and what it's meant to them to be a part of that program and be a part of sustaining success there. And I think that's what's made that program really, really special, because the talent level, yes, was there and has been there. It's not rocket science to get good college football players to come to San Diego to play, but it's the team game that they play. They've done it with maybe a little bit different mindset than in years past at San Diego State, even going back to their mid to early 90s with Marshall Faulk and Billy Blanton and a bunch of yards and electrifying offense. They do it with toughness. They do it with accountability. They do it with teamwork and overcoming adversity there. And the statistics for Ezel or Pumphrey or obviously, that offensive line, they go 300 across the board led by Terry Poole. They get their notoriety, they get their awards, but it's about the team goals week in and week out, and I think that's the best thing Rocky Long and his staff has done. And they've had the right kind of players, and I think that's why Ezel and Terry will both translate to guys that'll scrap and claw and do everything they can for an NFL roster. Whoever gets them will be lucky to have them.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. We talked about sort of the more national landscape as far as the playoff process. Alabama, Mississippi State, and Oregon basically had de facto bye weeks this week. I don't blame Oregon for that because they were playing a Pac-12 school in Colorado. Whether you want to say that the SEC is smart or ridiculous in scheduling some of these opponents late in the year to give themselves a de facto bye is kind of a conversation for another day. Who do you expect to be the kind of 4 teams when this thing all shakes out?
I think Oregon deserves to be number 1 this week, and I think they deserve to be number 1, and I thought they should have been number 1 last week. Colorado is not a de facto bye week, just like you said. It's not their fault that Colorado is not a great football team. But you know what, Alabama, you look at their schedule, to struggle with the Catalans from Western Carolina, or at least allow them to be in the football game. The committee's talked a lot about game control as part of their kind of the team charts and team statistics they look at. And if you allow a team like that, as talented as they may be in certain positions, to stay in the game when you're quote-unquote, the pride and joy of college football in this year of a playoff when you're the number 1 team, they deserve to be definitely in the top 4 last week. I thought they should have been 2. I just look at that SEC schedule that they played, and you talk so much about the West and the SEC West, but go look at Alabama's schedule, Ryan. They've played 3 or 4 teams from the East that I don't know if I would put up against either conference in the Big Ten. I don't know if I'd put it up against, I don't want to say the ACC because we know that's not true, but to talk about how, special and dangerous their schedule has been, yes, they beat Mississippi State at home as 8-point favorites. Now go win the Iron Bowl against an Auburn team that isn't the same shiny Auburn team that we thought they were going to be 4 or 5, 6 weeks ago. So the landscape of college football has changed, and everybody just keeps wanting to go back to the fact that Oregon, they play in the Pac-12 North, and that's basically the SEC East, and there's no good teams there. But look at the teams that Oregon's going to have to play. Look at the teams that they've beaten already. Look at the strength of schedule. Alabama's, yes, they of the top 7 teams have the highest strength of schedule rating that did have a very soft non-conference schedule. They should be penalized for that at some point, just like Baylor has been penalized for it in the Big 12. So when Ohio State scuffles with their opponent, I believe they had, was it Indiana?
Yeah, they had Indiana, and if Tevin Coleman isn't a finalist for the Heisman, then that award shouldn't exist because that guy is literally doing this on smoke and mirrors. I mean, he has nothing else on that offensive line for him. The offensive line is blocking well, but there is zero threat of a passing game from Indiana. There are 12 guys in the box at times, seemingly. And if he doesn't get the recognition that he has so absolutely deserved this season, there's something horribly wrong. But yeah, Indiana, by all tokens, probably should have won that game if they weren't so inept in certain phases of the game. And this was at Ohio State. So if we're going to put this huge burden of controlling games on Florida State and on Alabama and teams like that, Ohio State, I think to a certain degree, the committee has to make them live up to that as well.
Completely agree. And when you mentioned Florida State, everybody wants to, take shots at the Noles every week, and they're picking against them, and Florida's going to beat them this week. Well, they're not. They're probably going to hang around in the game with them, and Jameis Winston and that team is going to figure out a way to overcome their own personal problems on that football team to win the game. Right now, I just think it's a dangerous time for the committee because they've put Jeff Long, the Arkansas AD, who kind of is the spokesperson for that committee, gets up in front of cameras every week. He's going to do it tomorrow night. And he talks about game control, and he talks about the best 25 teams, and the top 4 is going to be consistent for that particular week, and they don't look at the previous week. Well, if you don't look at the previous week, and Alabama beat Mississippi State, yes, great, fine, and you're just going off of this week, how can you say they're the number 1 team in the nation this week? That's what I don't understand. How can you say that? I mean, Ohio State fans, I know Kirk Herbstreit's talking about them having a right to be in the top 4 maybe this week. How can you say that if they struggle with the team that you're going to – the same argument you would be made against Oregon by people in the SEC, by people out on the East Coast saying they should have – if that game was 31-28, Oregon beating Colorado, you and I both know we'd be hearing every talking head talk about the fact that Oregon didn't control the game and this and that. Well, wait a minute. Alabama, they're coming off that big win, and they've got the Iron Bowl next. That's a natural thing. That doesn't matter to me. The fact that you're supposedly supposed to be the number 1 team in the country, week in and week out, the committee's making a new rankings. If they don't change that top 4 and the order of that top 4 this week, they're not being consistent with what they're doing, and I don't know how you can convince me otherwise.
No, I think that's absolutely fair, and I do think that Florida State, they probably don't struggle against Florida. They're super talented, but they're a dumpster fire. I think they have trouble with Georgia Tech, and I really think that Georgia Tech gives them a really good game, and that's probably the game that maybe is the chink in the armor, so to speak. Let me ask you this: when Arkansas beats an Ole Miss team 30-0, does that hurt the SEC, or does that say more about Arkansas probably being the front runner for the SEC in 2015? Because they had some close losses at the beginning of the year. Sure, they've lost 5 games, but they are a very, very young but very, very talented football team that had every reason to beat an Ole Miss 30-0 and may very well be the best team in the SEC in 2015. But does that hurt the SEC in the eyes of the committee?
I think a lot of the things that have happened over the last few weeks have hurt the SEC in the eyes of the committee, but don't take a thing away from Arkansas. The fact that is the worst team statistically or standings-wise in the SEC West, I will stand on the desk in front of me and say the SEC West is the best conference in football. But when they're constantly beating each other up and the powers of that conference aren't able to sustain through the whole thing, then at that point I have to go to the non-conference, and I have to start comparing apples to apples at that point, and that's when I think a game like last week for Alabama or a game like Mississippi State had, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that if they're going to play in this rigid, horrible conference, and in Alabama's case, half of their conference games come against the Powder Puff SEC East, I don't think that's fair to sit there and just say, wow, that's a great conference. They didn't play everybody in it. So they lost to a team that just got beat 31-0 by the worst team in that side. So that Ole Miss loss to me for Alabama looks worse and worse by the week. And Oregon's loss to Arizona, and I know I keep going back to that. I think you can tell where my frustrations are with it. But Oregon's loss on a short week without half their offensive line to Arizona is looking better and better, especially with what they were able to do against the Utes from Utah. So I think you take a look at the whole picture. And I think Florida State is as good. I completely agree with you. I think their next real test is going to be Georgia Tech in that ACC championship game. But I still think there's enough veteran leadership on that team. I think the Noles are going to be in the playoff. And I think that it's going to be really fun to watch them try to respond and pick up all those pieces for the playoff, because the other 3 teams that end up making it are all going to having either been a one-loss team or a team that was number 1 at the time, either a Mississippi State or maybe it's an Ohio State, racing to the finish line and somehow getting in there. Florida State's just going to have to be really careful because they're no longer going to be playing against teams that they can scratch and claw and beat at the very end, like a Notre Dame, who we're finding out is not the Notre Dame that I thought. And I just think that the whole picture is going to come together. But I'm interested for tomorrow night. I think tomorrow night's rankings, just like I thought last week was very important. Going into this rivalry weekend, a lot of big games on the docket. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the committee does.
It'll also be interesting to see what the committee does with a UCLA team. And I know that's a team in my backyard where I've represented a lot of players, so it's a team that I continue to reference back to. But they handed it to USC. I mean, they destroyed USC. And it was a fairly even split Rose Bowl. I mean, it was a significant group of SC fans that made it to the game, and I was there. UCLA fumbles a snap inside the SC5, or that's a 30-point game. I mean, realistically, it didn't even feel like it was only a 28-point game, 28-point game. It felt much farther apart than that. But it'll be interesting to see what the committee does with that 2-loss UCLA team, because their losses came at home, certainly to Oregon, who we all think is the best team in the country, and a Utah team that had all of their weapons at that point. Dresden Anderson was still on the team. He made a couple of big plays before he then had the knee injury. And so that's not necessarily a terrible loss. But if they go to beat Stanford and then play Oregon tough in the Pac-12 title game, it'll be a really interesting discussion about where you have UCLA with respect to maybe the Baylors or the TCUs or the Ohio States or some of these other teams that may be on the outside looking in. It's just sort of an interesting thing to look at. But I think Eric Kendricks right now, inside linebacker for UCLA, is having one of the best seasons a linebacker has had in college football in the last 2 or 3 years. I think he's that special. That position is really undervalued in the NFL. He probably isn't going to be a first-round pick because he's undersized and because he's an inside linebacker. But as far as consistency to an NFL team, number of tackles, and importance to that team, he should be a top 10 pick. So that's going to be sort of interesting to watch that. The NFL this week, we can't start a discussion about the NFL without talking about Odell Beckham's catch last night. I've seen it, as you have, tons and tons of times. It doesn't look real to me. If somebody had sort of put that piece of tape out there, I think the conspiracy theorist in all of us would suggest, well, that's just not real. That didn't actually happen, especially when you spot shadow the fact that he caught the ball with 3 fingers. Is there anything that you saw in practice at San Diego State, in New England, in New York, in Miami, your short stint in Detroit? Is there anything you saw practicing or playing in the NFL that even resembles that?
No. And I got a chance to be around maybe one of the greatest receivers outside of Jerry Rice that ever lived, in Randy Moss, and he used to do some remarkable things. I saw him make a lot of one-handed catches look routine. But Ryan, that catch last night, the situation, the fact that it's a 40 or 50-yard throw from Eli Manning, tight coverage, he was interfered with on the play, and he catches it with 3 fingers. You're gonna have to show me a better catch than that in the history of the game, really. And I know that's crazy to say, and a lot of times people are so quick to throw that out, and it happened on Sunday Night Football, so a lot of eyeballs were on it. But just, I got to tell you, that was, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that one. It was just remarkable. And his ability to do that in that point in the game on prime time, and that's what makes guys like Odell Beckham special.
No, it's interesting. I mean, the play that we all sort of refer to as the catch is Dwight Clark in January of 1982 in the back of the end zone from Joe Montana, and you weren't even around when that happened, and I was only 3, so it's not like I was watching that game on that Sunday afternoon. But I Googled the catch, just that, this afternoon, and the first 10 articles were about Odell Beckham. So it's almost as if in the span of one weekend, that play has replaced the 30 years long tradition of what we sort of refer to as the catch. I don't think it'll remain as such, but it just sort of gives you an idea of how social media, how television, how all of that has changed things, where anybody in the country with a smartphone or access to a television or internet has seen that thing 12 hours after it actually happened, which is just remarkable. The Thursday night, Kansas City goes into Oakland, really struggles against an Oakland team that was winless. Oakland plays passionate football, comes out of there with a win. Is that Kansas City on sort of a letdown in between Seattle and Denver, or is that an Oakland team that was just playing desperate in division at home and sort of had Kansas City's number?
I think it's just the curse of the Thursday game late in the season, and I think you're going to continue to see it. And it just so happens that this weekend there's going to be 2 or 3 opportunities. I don't know why in the world the NFL would put Seattle, San Francisco on Thanksgiving. As physical as that game is, those teams seemingly are going to might not leave the San Francisco Levi Stadium intact, on 4 days rest after what both ended up having to, Seattle wins at home against a really good Arizona team without Carson Palmer, and Washington kind of gives enough of a fight to cause some scares there late there in San Francisco. But I just think that's a case of the Thursday night kind of issues that are striking professional football right now, and the fact that Jamal Charles had a good game, made some plays, but he's coming off of, I believe he had 28 or 29 carries 4 days before, and it's just the grind of the NFL season is enough as it is, and then you start throwing in these Thursday games. The home team is at such an advantage, practice time, meeting time, all those things that I think that's. I'll tell you what, if I was a betting man, I'm staying away from those Thursday games as much as possible. But yeah, I'm not. I still think Kansas City. In my opinion, until the Chargers can prove otherwise, I think Kansas City is the second best team in the AFC West.
Yeah. You do a lot of work. I don't know if a lot is a proper term, but I know you do some work for the Cleveland Browns and you do some sort of advanced scouting for them and things like that. So I know that you paid at least somewhat attention to the Cleveland-Atlanta game. Walk us through sort of that end-of-game scenario where the Atlanta coaching staff seemingly lost that game for the Falcons. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, I realize that I make my living in and around this sport, but that's inexcusable. I mean, that's not NFL-level coaching. To blunder the clock management so poorly at the end of a game that you cost your team a win, which we know is just so precious in the NFL. How do you explain such poor mismanagement?
You can't, and especially in a situation when it was clearly on the sideline. And there's been other situations. I forget the running back's name a few years back from Chicago who ran out of bounds twice and allowed Peyton Manning or Tim Tebow, I think at the time actually, to come back and beat them. There's been situations where players kind of ruin some clock management or late game situations, but for Brian Hoyer to throw interceptions like he did late in that game and in the second half, and for Cleveland to still have a chance, that's clearly on the shoulders of the Atlanta coaching staff, and it just cannot happen, especially at home like that, and especially in a division where, let's face it, if they win that game, the Saints, they're in for a dogfight tonight with the Ravens on Monday night. Carolina's Carolina at this point. I don't think anybody's really scared of Carolina, and Tampa loses to a Chicago team that, quite frankly, a lot of people would say we're on the ropes at this point. So I don't really know where that comes from, Ryan. I can just tell you that it's frustrating, I think, as a former player that was shown the door out of the league for, specific things that being held to a very, very high standard. I really think it's unfortunate that the guys that sometimes send a lot of maybe your clients and other agents' clients packing are able to have such I don't want to say mediocrity, but just the lack of professionalism to do. Just imagine, I can't tell you how many times has a client called you after they've been released or didn't make a team after a tryout, and it was about fundamentals or doing their job or being part of, just all the coach speak and the general manager speak that you hear at times, and then clearly a sideline loses the game for a team. So I have a real tough time with that for sure.
The ultimate irony is with the proliferation of the Madden video franchise and video games in general, you could have a fifth grader right now that's playing Madden like it's his job because his parents don't know how to parent, that knows how to manage the end of a game just because he's done it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And a coach that's being paid north of $5 million to not be able to do that it's just fascinating to me. And it's really sad. It's sad for that fan base. It's sad for the players on the field. Jobs are at stake. When you have a coach that gets fired or a general manager gets fired, there's a trickle-down effect, and so you've got guys on the team that get fired. I mean, it is a broader issue than just one football game, and it makes me want to pull my hair out because it's not representative of the product that we've grown to love in the NFL. It just shouldn't be.
Don't pull your hair out, Ryan. That quaff is way too valuable.
I appreciate that. It's not Mel Kiper Jr., but I appreciate that. Hey, one more thing before I let you go. Buffalo had a rough week this week. Supposed to have a home game, obviously significant snow. They've got a quasi-home game in Detroit. The Detroit organization, I think, has done a wonderful job welcoming them in. bringing in fans for free. Tickets are free to tonight's game. So if you're in the Detroit area and want to go see a football game, the game's free tonight. They've done all the markings on the field just like Buffalo would expect. The locker rooms are done out perfectly. What has that week been like for that team in your NFL playing experience, and how are they going to handle this?
I have no idea. The closest thing that I could even recall to something like that was when I was at San Diego State and we had the really bad wildfires in 2007, and our game against BYU was postponed until the end of the season, and we played it at home still against the opponent we were supposed to play just as an extra game. But the stories of being guys needing to be snowmobiled to the team charter, or the stories of some of the families and some of those guys that were able to do so, getting out in the Buffalo community and helping shovel snow for people that aren't able to do that. Or it's just stuff like this is what you start to see the best parts of the NFL, the Detroit Lions going above and beyond, way above and beyond, just opening up the doors to their facility and to their stadium. It's just really neat, and I'm glad that they're going to get a chance to play the game. It's a division game. It's important. I do think that the Bills are at a disadvantage. I do think that the lack of prep time and meeting time, the Jets obviously will have them outworked as far as man hours working to prepare for this game. But I don't think that'll change the fact that Doug Marrone will be able to rally his troops and say everybody's expecting us to have this built-in excuse, go out there and lose this football game because of that. Let's not have that happen. Let's go find a way to win the game. And I think it's going to be really close, but it's never have I ever heard of anything like that. I know there's been stories in the famous Joe Webb game on, I think it was a Tuesday night when he filled in for Brett Favre or whatever it was, but I expect to see a really good football game. I haven't checked. Is that game, I know it's on 4 o'clock out here in California. Is it on regular TV like it would have been, or do you have to?
I think it's on CBS. I think that the CBS crew, maybe Phil Sims's crew, on maybe it was Thursday night even, was talking about it being a 4 o'clock game on CBS. So I think it's on CBS, or I know it's on Sunday Ticket if it's not on sort of your regular TV. So no, I think if you don't have a dog in that fight, if you're not betting that game, and if you're not an ardent New York Jets fan, I think everybody in the country is going to be rooting for Buffalo, and I think appropriately so. So I think it's going to be interesting sort of drama to watch, and I certainly, for one, hope that they play well.
Who do you got in the Ravens and Saints game?
I think that the NFC South is so brutal that the Saints are still sort of alive, and I can't help but not see that team with Breeze and with Jimmy Graham seemingly healthy, and with the coaching job that Sean Payton does. I just can't see those guys losing as often as they are losing. So I continue to hang my hat on their success, even if it may be stupid, because Baltimore comes to play every single week. So probably a slight edge to New Orleans, but who knows?
Yeah, Drew Brees, kind of an interesting thing. I don't think Drew Brees, the only team he's never beat, I believe, is the Baltimore Ravens. So I know he was reminded about that this week, and he very quickly responded to that. But it'll be interesting to see. I actually think the Ravens will be able to do just enough defensively to make it hard for the Saints to do what they want to do. They're going to be without Brandon Cooks. I think Joe Flacco, this is the classic game. Joe Flacco going back to the place he's won his only Super Bowl. This is a classic game where everybody's talking about exactly what you were just talking about, and Joe Flacco goes and puts up 300 or 400 yards of passing offense and finding Steve Smith and Torrey Smith, and we're talking about that after the game when we should have been talking about it before the game. But we'll see, Ryan.
No, I think that's fair. Well, Kev, thanks a lot for your time, and we'll do this again next week, same time.
All right, buddy. Take care, man.
Thanks.